The first episode of The Rings of Power Season 1 is titled Shadow of the Past. The episode begins with a voiceover by Galadriel, who reflects on the nature of evil, stating that nothing is evil in the beginning. This philosophical opening is juxtaposed with a scene of children playing, highlighting the innocence and beauty of the world before the darkness of Morgoth's rule. The episode then flashes back to a time when Galadriel was a young girl, building a boat and watching it float away on the river. She is interrupted by a bully who destroys the boat, prompting Galadriel to defend herself. Her brother Finrod intervenes and stops the assault, offering Galadriel words of wisdom before walking away. The episode then jumps forward in time to show the aftermath of Morgoth's defeat in the First Age. The elves are shown to be rebuilding their cities and recovering from the devastating war. However, this peace is short-lived, as Morgoth's army of orcs led by Sauron spreads across Middle-earth. Galadriel's brother, Finrod, is killed by Sauron during a battle. Sauron brands Finrod's flesh with a symbol that not even the wisest of elves could understand. This left Galadriel angry and with a thirst for revenge. The episode then takes a time skip to the present day, where Galadriel is now an older and more experienced warrior. She is shown scaling a frozen wall with nothing but a knife, determined to find and defeat Sauron. This scene highlights Galadriel's growth and development as a character, as well as her unwavering commitment to her quest. In the icy lands of Forodwaith, Galadriel's soldiers urge her to turn back and tell her that there's nothing ahead as they face the harsh climate. But Galadriel remains resolute and tells them to keep going forward. This is where Galadriel and her company explore a deserted orc citadel, where they discover Sauron's mysterious sigil carved in ice. In the citadel, they encounter an ancient, monstrous creature that looks set to kill them, but Galadriel ends up killing it with merely her knife, showing her side as a fearsome warrior. After killing the beast, Galadriel's company revolts and tells her that they're not going to follow her anymore, as they believe that she'll end up getting them killed. Galadriel pleads with them to keep going forward and find the last stronghold of the orcs, but their mind is made up and they decline. The episode also introduces other characters, including High King Gil-galad, Elrond, and Celebrimbor. These characters are all familiar faces from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but they are presented in a new and different light here. Elrond is shown to be a more youthful and energetic character, and Celebrimbor is introduced as a skilled crafter of the Rings of Power. Galadriel travels to Lindon, which is the headquarters of the High Elves, where she is greeted by her friend Elrond. Elrond congratulates her on her successful exploits in the war and welcomes her back. Galadriel, however, tells him that her work is not done, and she plans to ask the High King for a new company so she can go back hunting Sauron. The king organizes an event to celebrate the heroes who have returned from the war, including Galadriel. The king tells them that the days of war are over, and it's now time for peace. He says that they can all now go to the immortal lands of the far west, where they can spend the rest of their days in peace. After the ceremony ends, Galadriel and Elrond talk again, and Elrond tries to talk Galadriel out of her decision to go back. Galadriel tells Elrond that it was her brother's mission to hunt Sauron, and it's her job to take it forward now. Elrond tells Galadriel that she's just conflicted, and the evil is now gone, and she has nothing to worry about. He asks her to hang up her sword and live in peace now. Galadriel asks what she would even be without her sword, to which Elrond replies, "What you've always been, my friend." In the Southlands, a land of men, the elves who were watching over them are finally allowed to return home. Arondir, an elf, says goodbye to Bronwyn, a human healer whom he has feelings for despite their species not seeing eye to eye. However, their separation is short-lived as they venture to a nearby village, where they find it destroyed, indicating that the evil isn't gone. They discover a disturbingly sick cow, which leads them to investigate further, revealing signs of danger in Bronwyn's home village. Her son, Theo, reveals a kilt engraved with Sauron's symbol, foreshadowing the return of the Dark Lord. In the Harfoot's land, the only one without strife, the migrating ancestors of the hobbits are living peacefully. However, This tranquility is disrupted by the arrival of a shooting star that crashes outside their camp. This event marks the beginning of a new era of darkness and danger in Middle-earth. Everyone in the realm witnesses this shooting star, and immediate looks of concern start appearing on everyone's faces. Galadriel, who's on a ship heading to the city of Valinor, also sees the shooting star. She jumps off the ship seconds before it reaches Valinor, stranding her in the middle of the ocean, trying to figure out what to do. Back in Lindon, a leaf laden with a dark substance falls before the king, signaling the return of evil. Meanwhile, Eleanor, a Harfoot, investigates a shooting star that has crashed just outside their camp. She looks at it with amazement and horror as she sees a figure curled up right in the middle of the crash amongst all the fire. This concludes the first episode of The Rings of Power Season 1. The second episode of The Rings of Power Season 1 is titled Adrift. The episode opens with Galadriel adrift at sea after jumping off the ship bound for Valinor at the end of the previous episode. She is rescued by a group of human survivors on a makeshift raft, but they turn on her when they realize she is an elf. One of the men pushes Galadriel off the raft, believing her presence has doomed them. This ends up saving Galadriel, as the raft is then destroyed by a massive sea creature called the Worm, leaving only Galadriel and one human survivor, a man named Halbrand, floating in the ocean. In the Harfoot community, the mysterious stranger who crash-landed in the previous episode regains consciousness. Young Harfoot Nori Brandyfoot and her friend Poppy Proudfellow discover him and begin caring for him in secret. Nori goes near the crash site, much to the disappointment of her friend, and touches the fire, only to realize it's not warm at all. Suddenly, the giant, as they both term it, wakes up and grabs Nori's hand before passing out again, startling the daylight out of Nori. They put the stranger on a cart and wheel him away because Nori says that she feels responsible for him. The stranger exhibits unusual powers, causing disturbances in the Harfoot camp. One incident involves Nori's father, Largo, who snaps his ankle while carving lines in the ground. Nori tries to communicate with the stranger, who seems fixated on a constellation in the night sky. The stranger makes strange noises that summon whirlwinds, and Nori and Poppy form a tentative bond with him, bringing him food and observing his drawings of runes they cannot decipher. The presence of the mysterious stranger causes unease in the Harfoot community, with the Elder Sadok resisting calls to break camp and move on, at least until after an upcoming festival. In a region, Elrond visits the elven smith Celebrimbor, who is determined to forge something of great importance. Celebrimbor tells Elrond a story about the Silmarils, the powerful jewels created by the elf Feanor. Celebrimbor envisions building a massive tower to house a great forge capable of transforming Middle-earth. However, he informs Elrond that the project must be completed by spring and requires an enormous workforce. Elrond suggests seeking help beyond their own race and proposes traveling to the realm of the dwarves to persuade the dwarves of Khazad-dûm to assist with the construction of the new forge. Elrond, accompanied by Celebrimbor, arrive at Khazad-dûm to meet with his old friend, Prince Durin. Initially, Durin refuses to allow them into the city, but Elrond invokes the right of Sigintareg. The gate promptly opens, and Elrond alone makes his way inside, after assuring Celebrimbor to trust him. Durin is deeply offended that Elrond has been absent for the past 20 years, missing major events in Durin's life. The Rite of Sigintareg turns out to be a competitive rock-splitting contest. They engage in the rock-splitting contest, which Elrond ultimately forfeits. Durin's wife, Disa, convinces Durin to at least consider Elrond's request for aid, though the Dwarven king remains wary of putting trust in the elves. Meanwhile, Galadriel and Halbrand have a tense conversation while adrift at sea. Halbrand reveals that he and the other survivors were fleeing from orcs, which piques Galadriel's interest as she continues her obsessive hunt for any trace of Sauron. She pressures him into telling her where he encountered the orcs and exactly how many of them were there. Halbrand tells her that he encountered them in the Southlands. Galadriel asks him to take her to their last known location, but Halbrand tells her that he's got his own plans. Soon, a heavy storm hits, and Galadriel becomes entangled in a rope, falling into the water with seemingly no chance of survival. Halbrand jumps in after her, cuts the rope, and saves her. Eventually, a ship approaches them through the fog, hinting at a potential rescue or further entanglement in the growing conflict. In the Southlands, Arondir the elf continues to investigate the ruins of the destroyed village, discovering an underground tunnel system. He sends Bronwyn to warn the villagers, but they are skeptical of the threat. When Bronwyn returns home, her son Theo is attacked by an orc. Together, they manage to kill the orc and use its severed head to convince the villagers of the danger. Realizing the threat, the villagers decide to evacuate and seek refuge. While investigating the tunnels, Arondir notices a large, monstrous figure approaching and quickly tries to retreat. He sees rats fleeing in his direction and attempts to crawl away but falls into a water pit. As he swims out and prepares to defend himself with his knife, a monstrous creature appears from behind and abducts him. As Bronwyn and the villagers begin evacuating, Theo discovers that the Sauron-branded sword he found reacts to his blood, causing a fiery blade to emerge. This hints at the growing influence of a dark force in the Southlands. As the villagers flee, ominous signs suggest that the orcs are once again gathering strength in the region. This concludes the second episode of The Rings of Power Season 1. The third episode of The Rings of Power Season 1 is titled Adar. The episode begins with Arondir, the Sylvan elf, being dragged through a dark underground tunnel by a group of orcs. One of the orcs ominously whispers, "For Adar," as they toss Arondir outside, where he is chained and forced to work alongside other captive elves, including his patrol companions Medhor and Rivion. The prisoners are shown to be digging a passageway, surrounded by gnarled tree roots that seem to cage them. Arondir realizes the orcs have captured them and taken them to an unknown location. Sounds of women crying and the orcs torturing people who are not working hard enough for their liking can be heard all over. Meanwhile, Galadriel awakens on a ship, finding herself alongside Halbrand. Their ship arrives at the westernmost realm in the world, the island kingdom of Numenor, also known as the Land of the Star. The ship is captained by Elendil, who steers them through the towering rock faces and giant carved statues of Numenor. Galadriel tells Halbrand that Numenor was once an ally of the elves against Morgoth, and the Valar rewarded them for their bravery by creating Numenor for their people. In contrast, Halbrand's people, the men of the Southlands, sided with Morgoth against the elves. Over time, distrust for the elves grew in Numenor, leading to the practical banning of elves from the island. This is why Galadriel received looks of bafflement and intrigue wherever she went. Galadriel and Halbrand are brought before the regent of Numenor, Miriel. Galadriel, intent on continuing her quest to hunt down Sauron and return to Middle-earth, requests a ship and passage. Miriel, however, informs her that she cannot leave just yet. Speaking in a disrespectful tone, Galadriel tells Miriel that everything Numenor possesses was given to them by the Valar, which angers the people present. As tensions rise between Galadriel and the regent, Halbrand intervenes, using his surprisingly adept diplomatic skills to secure them a place to stay for the next 3 days. While wandering through the streets of Numenor, Galadriel is struck by the city's grandeur and advanced architecture, which surpasses anything in Middle-earth. In the Southlands, Arondir and his friends begin to discuss the mysterious figure, Adar, whom the orcs appear to hold in very high esteem. Arondir speculates that they may have found Morgoth's successor. When the orcs catch them slacking off, an orc shouts at them. Rivion explains that a giant tree is blocking their path and they cannot proceed through the tunnel. He suggests it would be easier to go around the tree, noting that it has been there long before the orcs arrived. This angers one of the orcs, who appears to be a captain. Surprisingly, the captain offers them water and commends Rivion for his courage to stand up to the orcs. Rivion and Arondir drink first, but when Medor starts drinking, the orc slashes his neck and kills him. Afterward, Elendil is summoned by the Queen Regent, who informs him that Galadriel will be his responsibility since he brought her to their shores. Later, Galadriel and Elendil visit the Hall of Lore, a vast library filled with ancient scrolls. There, Galadriel discovers that the sigil Halbrand wears is not merely a symbol, but a map of the Southlands. She realizes that this map represents a plan by Sauron, Morgoth's successor, to transform the Southlands into a realm where evil can thrive if Morgoth fails. Meanwhile, Sadok Burrows delivers a heartfelt speech, remembering all the Harfoots who were left behind, those who were either killed or injured and couldn't keep up with the caravan. The speech is abruptly interrupted by the stranger, who accidentally gets tangled in a rug and stumbles into the procession. Startled, the stranger calls out Nori's name, inadvertently causing trouble. One of the elders suggests kicking Nori's family out of the caravan, but Sadok, recognizing Nori's youth and learning process, decides against exile for the Brandyfoots. Instead, he assigns them to ride at the very back of the caravan as a form of punishment. As the Harfoot caravan continues its migration, Poppy struggles alone with her cart, while Largo deals with his injured ankle from an earlier mishap. Just when all hope seems lost and the caravan begins to slip from sight, the cart suddenly shakes. Emerging from behind it, the mysterious stranger offers to help push the cart, much to the relief of the Harfoots. In Numenor, Galadriel visits Halbrand in prison and reveals her discovery. The sigil he wears is not merely a symbol, but a map of the Southlands. She realizes this signifies a plan by Morgoth's successor, Sauron, to transform the Southlands into a realm where evil can flourish. Galadriel shares this revelation with Halbrand, urging him to embrace his destiny as the heir of the Southlands and join her in the fight against the darkness. However, Halbrand remains resistant to the idea, preferring to continue his new life in this unfamiliar realm. As Arondir and the other captive elves labor in the trench, they devise an escape plan. During a deadly game of tug-of-war with their chains, Arondir dashes across the chains and leaps off to bring down the ragged sun shelter, exposing the orcs to the blistering sunlight. This diversion allows Revian to break free momentarily, but as he dashes across the open ground, he is struck down by an arrow before reaching safety. Arondir is then pulled back underground, spared from certain death, but now facing an ominous fate, being taken to the mysterious Adar. As he is dragged away, the camera shifts to reveal a figure who appears more human than orc, wearing a familiar clawed glove on his left hand, the mysterious Adar. This concludes the third episode of The Rings of Power Season 1. The fourth episode of The Rings of Power Season 1 is titled The Great Wave. The episode opens in Numenor, where Queen Regent Miriel holds an audience with Galadriel, in which she examines the scrolls that Galadriel brought back from the Hall of Lore. Galadriel urges Miriel to reforge the alliance between Numenor and the elves to fight against Sauron. However, Miriel refuses, stating that Numenor will not join the fight. Galadriel then dismisses Miriel's authority and declares that she will follow the wishes of Miriel's deposed father. As a result, Galadriel is locked behind bars in the Numenorian jail, 2 cells down from Halbrand. Meanwhile, in the streets of Numenor, a man stirs up anti-elf sentiment, calling Queen Miriel an elf lover. Chancellor Pharazôn interrupts the chants and pledges that elf hands will never take Numenor's helm. He then sends wine to the crowd, hoping to calm the situation. In this celebratory mood, Caiman, Pharazôn's son, chats up Iarian, daughter of Elendil. As Miriel and Pharazôn walk through the streets, a blizzard of white petals begins to fall from the tree, blanketing the kingdom. Miriel understands the meaning of this, stating that there is a fateful hour in the destinies of men, and that each person must decide who they will be. She then decides to escort Galadriel back to Middle-earth to aid the Southlands in their fight against the growing darkness. Miriel calls for volunteers from among the sons and daughters of Numenor to join them, and a wave of hands rises in response. In the Southlands, Arondir is still held captive by the orcs, but he is able to communicate with their leader, Adar, in Elvish. Adar reveals that he is not Sauron, as previously hinted, but rather a rogue elf who has become disillusioned with the ways of his people. He tells Arendir that you have been told many lies, and that to untangle it all would all but require the creation of a new world. Adar then frees Arendir and gives him a message for the people of the Southlands. They can remain in their homes if they swear fealty to him or face the consequences. In Khazad-dûm, Elrond returns to the Dwarven Kingdom to investigate Celebrimbor's suspicions about what Durin is hiding. Elrond first tries to break Daya, but she remains firm and lies through her teeth to Elrond. However, Elrond, still not convinced, uses his elven ears to overhear Durin telling Disa that they are making progress in an old mine. Elrond quickly remembers the mine that they're talking about, and then descends into a hidden chamber, where he snoops around before Durin arrives and catches him in the act. Elrond asks him why he's keeping all these secrets from him, and Durin makes him swear an oath on a mountain rock that he won't tell another soul. He then shows him a new ore he has discovered, a glowing silvery purple ore that Durin identifies as mithril, a metal that is lighter than silk, harder than iron. Durin tells Elrond that this discovery could mark a new era for the dwarves, but as it is a perilous material to mine, it has been restricted by the king. Durin gives Elrond a nugget of mithril as a token of their renewed friendship, but as they embrace their renewed friendship, the ground starts shaking, and an earthquake occurs, filling the room with a cloud of dust. Durin, realizing that 4 dwarves are in the mine that has just been hit by the earthquake, quickly rushes to help. Meanwhile, Galadriel manages to escape from her cell by fighting and imprisoning the guards who came to escort her. She then barges into the Old King's Tower, where Miriel is waiting for her. Galadriel asks Miriel directly, "How did you know I would come here?" Miriel replies that she knew Galadriel would seek the king out. Galadriel then pleads with Miriel to reforge the alliance between Numenor and the elves to fight against Sauron. Miriel explains that her father, the previous king, had tried to renew relations with the elves, but the people of Numenor rebelled against him. Miriel was then chosen as Queen Regent, with the promise of fulfilling her father's wishes. However, she now refuses to join the fight against Sauron, stating that Numenor will not get involved. Galadriel presses Miriel further, asking her to explain what has happened. Miriel then reveals that Numenor possesses one of the 7 Palantiri, the ancient Seeing Stones. She orders Galadriel to touch the Palantir, which shows Galadriel a vision of a great wave crashing over Numenor, destroying the island. Miriel tells Galadriel that this vision suggests Numenor's doom is tied to Galadriel's arrival. Therefore, Miriel is determined to send Galadriel away, believing this is the only way to prevent Numenor's destruction. Despite Galadriel's pleas, Miriel remains steadfast in her decision not to aid the fight against Sauron. The confrontation ends with Galadriel giving Miriel a meaningful look as she prepares to board the ship that will take her back to Middle-earth, accompanied by a group of Númenórean volunteers. Meanwhile, Theo argues with his mother Bronwyn, insisting that there's no food left at the outpost. He tells her he's going to the village to get some root beet from the barn. Bronwyn refuses to let Theo go, but Theo sneaks out and takes one of his friends along with him. However, when he gets to the village, he is found and attacked by a group of orcs. Theo hides in a well, hoping to outwait the orcs and escape when night falls. As he attempts to flee, an orc catches him and demands to know the location of Sauron's hilt. The orc tries to cut off Theo's arm, but Arendir, returning to the Southlands to deliver Adar's message to the people, arrives just in time to save him, plucking an arrow out of the air and firing it back at the orcs in a dramatic display of his elvish prowess. They run out of the forest with Arendir continuously firing arrows and killing orcs along the way. Theo, injured and struggling to keep up, is shielded by Arendir, who helps him out of the forest. As they emerge, the sun begins to rise, saving their lives, as the orcs hate sunlight and cannot be in open daylight. In Numenor, as Miriel returns from sending Galadriel off, white petals begin falling from the giant tree, signaling imminent danger. Queen Regent Miriel delivers a rousing speech to the people, urging them to defend their mortal brethren in the Southlands against the growing darkness. Elendil rallies the volunteers, asking, Who among you will serve? Who among you will sail with me to Middle-earth? His son, Isildur, is one of the first to raise his hand, declaring, I will serve. Many others follow suit, and almost all of Númenor answers the call to arms as triumphant music plays in the background. This concludes the fourth episode of The Rings of Power Season 1. The fifth episode of The Rings of Power Season 1 is titled Partings. The episode begins in the Southlands, where the threat of Adar and his orc army looms ever closer. Bronwyn and Arondir, taking refuge in the old elf watchtower at Osterith, notice that their people are divided on how to respond. While Bronwyn urges them to stay and fight, a vocal minority, led by Waldreg, decides to surrender and join Adar. Waldreg even asks Theo to come with him, telling him that it's their time now. With Bronwyn looking on with a concerned expression, Waldreg and other Southlanders make their way towards Adar's camp. When Waldreg meets Adar, he declares that he has been waiting for this moment his entire life. However, he mistakenly calls him Sauron, which angers Adar. To prove his loyalty, Adar demands that Waldreg kill a fellow villager. With the other villagers looking on in horror, Waldreg, holding his blade, rushes towards the young boy before the scene cuts. Meanwhile, in Númenor, Galadriel, who has convinced Queen Miriel and the Númenorian people to sail to Middle-earth and aid the Southlanders in their fight against the growing darkness, makes plans with the Queen and Halbrand, who's been revealed to have a royal lineage. The Queen asks Halbrand where the Southlanders are likely to make their stand, and he quickly points to the Osterith watchtower. When the Queen mentions that his fellowship will be valuable upon their arrival, Halbrand appears surprised, as this is news to him. The Queen explains that Galadriel had informed her of his aspirations to unite his people, to which Halbrand replies, "Did she now?" Galadriel interjects that when the time comes, Halbrand will do his part, and the Queen responds, "I should hope so." After the Queen leaves, Galadriel tells Halbrand that she has convinced Númenor to send 5 ships and 500 men to aid the Southlanders and crown him king of the Southlands. Halbrand, however, tells her to crown someone else and walks away. As the Númenorian ships are about to set sail in the morning, Caiman, the Chancellor's son, tries to sabotage them by setting them on fire to force his father and the Queen to delay their departure for war. However, Isildur, hidden away on the ship Caiman targeted, intervenes. The two struggle, leading to an explosion that wrecks one of the ships. Isildur could have saved himself, but instead chooses to save Caiman and pulls him ashore. To protect Caiman, Isildur lies to his father, claiming that a cask must have exploded, causing the blast on the ship. This incident prompts Queen Miriel to call a council meeting. She tells Galadriel that it might be a sign and that the council will reconvene in the morning. She also instructs Galadriel to ensure that Lord Halbrand is present at the meeting, no matter the cost. Afterward, Galadriel talks to Halbrand, who remains reluctant to go to Middle-earth. Halbrand reveals that he has a troubled past and has done terrible things to ensure his and his people's survival. He fears that if anyone discovers this, they will quickly depose him as king. Galadriel apologizes for using him and tells him that the fate of his people now depends on him taking the journey to the Southlands. Galadriel's persistence and belief in him eventually persuade Halbrand to join the Númenorian forces as they set sail for Middle-earth. In Lindon, tensions rise between Elrond and High King Gil-galad. Elrond learns from the High King that the elves' light is fading, and the only thing that can save them now is the mithril discovered by the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. Both the king and Celebrimbor had sent Elrond to Khazad-dûm to secure the mithril, but Elrond had vowed to Durin not to reveal the existence of the precious metal. Celebrimbor apologizes to Elrond for not informing him sooner, explaining that the High King had forbidden him from revealing the plan. Elrond now faces an impossible choice: save his people by betraying his friend or upholding his oath to his friend. Accordingly, Elrond decides to tell Durin that the fate of the entire elven race rests in his hands. Durin eventually agrees to convince his father, King Durin III, to allow the elves to mine the mithril, as Elrond reveals that without it, the elves will be forced to abandon Middle-earth or perish. Meanwhile, the stranger continues to learn about their way of life from Nori. She teaches him about the dangers they face on their migratory journey, including predators like wargs. When the Brandyfoots reach the forest, they are attacked by a pack of wargs. Nori and the others run for their lives, but the wargs soon catch up with them. Just as they are about to be devoured, the stranger demonstrates his otherworldly power by easily scaring off the wargs. He flings them away by beating the ground with his fists, generating a strong gust of wind that sends the creatures flying, much to Nori's relief. However, his lack of control over his abilities also frightens Nori, who wonders if he might be one of the perils they face. As the end of the episode, the Númenórean ships set sail for Middle-earth, carrying Isildur, Galadriel, and Halbrand, now dressed as a lord, among others, to join the war in the Southlands. Their mission is to save the people there from impending doom, as time runs out for Bronwyn and the others at Ostirith who can see the orc army approaching. This concludes the 5th episode of The Rings of Power Season 1. The 6th episode of The Rings of Power Season 1 is titled Udun. The episode begins with Adar planting a handful of Alpharin seeds in the dirt, whispering, "New life in defiance of death." We learn later in the episode from Arondir that it's a tradition among the elves to plant Alpharin seeds before a battle begins. Adar and his orc army, including the treacherous Waldreg, march on the Ostirith watchtower, their torches illuminating the night. Adar rallies his troops, declaring that even though some of them will perish before the night is over, this time they will do so not as nameless slaves, but as brothers. As the orcs reach the tower's gate, Adar opens it, but they are surprised to find the courtyard deserted. When the orcs insist the tower is empty, Adar dismisses their claim, stating he can smell the elf nearby. Suddenly, Arondir emerges from behind a parapet, unleashing a barrage of arrows upon the orcs. With defenses already in place, he causes the tower's scaffolding to collapse, injuring many orcs in the process. He then secures the door with a heavy rock, hurling it down into the pit and trapping Adar's forces inside. Arondir leaps onto the bridge and escapes, seemingly sealing Adar and his forces beneath the rubble. The Southlanders witness this and cheer from their village, but Bronwyn knows the battle is far from over. Meanwhile, on the sundering seas, Númenor's ships glide through the night. Galadriel spots Isildur, who is out to catch the first glimpse of land with his eyes. Galadriel asks him his rank, and he is ashamed to admit his low rank as a stable sweep. Elendil comes and interrupts their conversation and sends Isildur away to work. Elendil then goes and reports to Queen Miriel that they are a day's sail up the river and another day's ride to the Southlands, and she urges them to make haste. In the Southlands, Arondir attempts to destroy Sauron's hilt, but finds it seemingly indestructible. Frustrated, he decides to conceal the hilt in a secret location, refusing to disclose it even to Bronwyn. Meanwhile, as the villagers set traps for the oncoming orcs, Bronwyn arrives to tend to Arondir's wounds, and they share a tender kiss. After receiving encouragement from Arondir, who assures them that if they fulfill their duties, they will witness another sunrise, Bronwyn then directs the fighters to their positions and assigns Theo to safeguard the tavern alongside the women and children. She hands him a spear, instructing him to protect them from the orc invaders. As the second wave of the orc attack hits, Bronwyn hurls a flaming cart at the orcs, setting several of them ablaze. The battle commences with Arondir, unleashing arrows from atop a house onto the invading orc forces. Amidst the chaos, an orc scales the roof and knocks Arondir down. Arondir manages to kill the orc, but a massive, imposing orc breaks through the fray and advances towards him. Although Arondir stabs the orc in the eye, the orc's sheer size and strength overpower him. Pinning him down, the orc prepares to strike Arondir when Bronwyn arrives just in time. She drives her sword through the orc's chest, saving Arondir from certain death. However, Arondir soon realizes that the attacking force consists mostly of humans disguised as orcs, not the actual orc army. This becomes apparent when a barrage of arrows begins to rain down, one of which hits Bronwyn. Arondir swiftly orders everyone to fall back to the tavern, carrying Bronwyn in his arms. The orcs break through the tavern, and Adar begins to systematically kill the villagers, holding Arondir hostage and demanding to know where he's hidden the hilt. When Adar orders the orcs to kill Bronwyn next, Theo, driven by love for his mother, reveals the hilt's location to Adar. Adar seizes the hilt and escapes, leaving the orcs to massacre the remaining survivors. However, the tide of battle shifts dramatically when the Númenórean cavalry, led by Galadriel and Elendil, arrives. They charge into the village, swords and spears clashing with the orcs' weapons. In the fierce combat that ensues, the Númenórean soldiers overwhelm the orcs, killing most and capturing the rest as prisoners. After the battle, Galadriel sets out to chase down the fleeing Adar. Halbrand, seeing Galadriel in pursuit, immediately follows after her. The chase leads them through the rugged terrain, with Galadriel and Halbrand galloping on horseback, determined to capture the elusive Adar. Adar weaves through the trees and rocky outcroppings, using his intimate knowledge of the land to try and evade his pursuers. At one point, Adar's horse is knocked out from under him by Halbrand's well-aimed throw of his spear. As Adar tumbles to the ground, Halbrand rides up, his spear now pointed directly at the fallen orc leader. Halbrand stands over Adar and asks him if he remembers who he is. Adar simply replies, "No," seemingly unaware of any past connection between them. This response seems to infuriate Halbrand, who raises his spear, ready to deliver a killing blow. However, Galadriel intervenes, stopping Halbrand and reminding him that they need Adar alive for questioning. Afterward, Galadriel and Halbrand bring the captured Adar to a barn, where Galadriel begins to interrogate him. She confronts Adar, acknowledging that he is a corrupted elf who once served Morgoth and was the first of the orcs. Adar corrects her, stating that he is one of the Uruk, a more advanced breed of orc. He then makes a startling claim, that after Morgoth's defeat, Sauron devoted himself to healing Middle-earth, bringing the ruined lands together in perfect order. Adar goes on to say that Sauron sought to craft a power not of the flesh, but in the unseen world. However, Adar claims that there was a shadow of dark knowledge that Sauron could not uncover despite the lives sacrificed, including Adar's children. In a shocking turn of events, Adar declares that he split open Sauron and killed him. Galadriel reacts with skepticism, unwilling to accept that Adar could have overcome the Dark Lord. In another twist, it is revealed that what Adar escaped with was not Sauron's hilt, but merely a weapon. He had cunningly entrusted the hilt to Waldreg, who had then plunged it into the rock at Osterith Watchtower. As soon as he does that, a rumbling in the earth starts to occur. Suddenly, the river erupts, overflowing the bridges and rushing down the mountain. Geysers explode throughout the village, and water crashes through crude tunnels, leading to a cavern filled with angry red lava deep within the mountain. As the water pours into the cavern, it triggers a volcanic eruption, sending fireballs through the air and crashing into the village as everyone runs for their lives. This concludes the 6th episode of The Rings of Power Season 1. The 7th episode of The Rings of Power Season 1 is titled The Eye. The episode begins with the aftermath of Mount Doom's eruption. The survivors of the Southlands are left to pick up the pieces. Galadriel awakens to a transformed landscape, a once lush land now reduced to a desolate wasteland. She finds Theo amidst the destruction, and the two set out together. Miriel and Isildur lead the rescue efforts in the ruins. They find Valandil under the rubble and bring him out, but Valandil and Isildur's other friend is found dead, much to their despair. Miriel loses her eyesight in the process when a sudden fire erupts, which ends up blinding her. Elendil assumes the worst when Isildur isn't with Valandil and Queen Miriel and decides to return to Númenor without him. Galadriel opens up to Theo, sharing the pain of losing her brother and her husband, Celeborn, who died fighting against Morgoth. She reassures Theo that the current disaster is not his fault, remarking, "There are forces beyond darkness at work in this world. Perhaps on days like this, we must trust their plans and surrender our own." Curious, Theo asks Galadriel if she has killed many orcs, to which she responds affirmatively. Galadriel assures Theo that he will have plenty of opportunities to fight orcs as well. When Theo questions if she considers herself a soldier now, Galadriel hands him her sword and suggests that perhaps they can mold him into a soldier yet. Meanwhile, in Khazad-dûm, Elrond pleads with King Durin to save his people by allowing them to mine the mithril. The king, however, says that he cannot risk the lives of dwarves in the deep mines just to help the elves cheat death. After the king's decision, Elrond bids a tearful farewell to his friend Prince Durin. Overwhelmed by the prospect of losing Elrond, Prince Durin desperately calls out for him to stay. Ignoring the king's orders, they embark on a secret mining expedition deep within the mountain, where they uncover a vast quantity of mithril. Their elation, however, is short-lived as King Durin catches them in the act. Enraged, the king banishes Elrond, refusing to mine the mithril or aid the elves in any way. Prince Durin confronts his father in a heated argument, accusing him of betraying the principles of their crown. When Prince Durin declares Elrond as dear as a brother, a sentiment akin to being born from their own mother's womb, King Durin's anger peaks. He strips Prince Durin of his princedom before storming away in fury. In the Harfoot camp, Sadok reluctantly decides to send the stranger away, fearing the danger posed by his powers to their vulnerable community. Before departing, Sadok leaves the stranger a clue regarding the constellation he has been seeking and bids him farewell. The following morning, the Harfoots awaken to a remarkable sight. The previously barren black land has transformed into lush greenery, adorned with thriving apple trees. The stranger had utilized his mysterious abilities to accelerate the growth of the apple trees, offering a much-needed break for the Harfoot community. Meanwhile, the mystics, the mysterious beings who have been tracking the stranger, arrive at the Harfoot camp, sensing the stranger's presence there. Nori spots them and attempts to mislead them, directing them away from the stranger's trail. Her father intervenes with a torch, warning the mystics that he will defend his daughter fiercely. Unbeknownst to him, one of the mystics known as the Dweller possesses the ability to control fire with magic. Ignoring the threat, the Dweller callously sets the entire Harfoot caravan ablaze, reducing their homes to ash in a devastating display of power. Following the destruction of their settlement by the Dweller, the Harfoots, led by Nori, decide to catch up with the stranger. As they clean up the charred remnants of their homes, Largo reminds them that Harfoots stay true to each other, no matter how winding or steep the path. Inspired by her father's words, Nori sets out to find the stranger, joined by Poppy and Marigold. Sadok, moved by their resolve, decides to accompany them on their journey. Meanwhile, the survivors of the Southlands regroup at a Númenórean encampment, where Theo is reunited with Bronwyn and Arondir. Galadriel kneels before the blinded Miriel, who vows to return to Middle-earth again. With their home destroyed, the Southlanders prepare to travel to Pelargir, an old Númenórean colony, for a fresh start, as Queen Miriel and Elendil set sail for Númenor. Galadriel reunites with an injured Halbrand, discovered on the road amidst the chaos, his wounds too severe for the Southlanders' medicine. Seeing his condition, Galadriel informs Bronwyn that Halbrand, now deemed the King of the Southlands, requires elvish medicine to recover. They prepare to ride towards Lindon for this purpose. As they depart, the Southlanders bow before Halbrand, chanting in unison, "Strength to the King! Strength to the Southlands!" In the Southlands, Adar walks amongst his forces amidst the red mist of the volcano. The orcs acclaim him as the Lord of the Southlands, but Adar dismisses this title, stating, "That is the name of a place that exists no longer." He then declares the Southlands as the orcs' new home and gives it the name of Mordor. As this unfolds, deep within the mithril mines, an ancient and immensely powerful creature, a Balrog, awakens. This occurs when King Durin throws an elven leaf down into the mines, and upon touching the ground, it incinerates, triggering the Balrog's awakening. This concludes the 7th episode of The Rings of Power Season 1. The 8th and final episode of The Rings of Power Season 1 is titled Alloyed. The episode begins with the stranger wandering through the forest. He continues to hear Nori's reassuring voice in his head, telling him, "You're good." He suddenly sees a hooded figure who suddenly starts running away from him. The stranger, thinking that it's Nori, stumbles his way forward towards the hooded figure. As he stumbles down a steep hill, he loses the precious apple Nori had given him. When he reaches the bottom of the hill, the stranger encounters the 3 mystics: the dweller, the ascetic, and the nomad. The 3 mystics bow down in front of the stranger and say, "We've come to serve you, Lord Sauron." They believe the stranger is Sauron and try to remind him of his true identity as the Dark Lord through magic and persuasion. The stranger shows him the constellation that he's been carrying with him, and the mystics tell him that it is visible in only one place, the land of Rune. Nori and Sadok race to the spot where the stranger is kneeling, bound by the mystics. As they attempt to free him, they discover it is actually the ascetic, who has taken on the stranger's form. Suddenly, the mystic stabs Sadok, mortally wounding him. With Nori's friends about to face the same fate, Nori hands the stranger a staff and tells him they need him right now. The stranger, seeing Nori in danger, transforms into his powerful Istar form. The 3 mystics immediately realize that he is not Sauron, but the other one, the Istar. The stranger uses the staff to unleash a powerful blast of energy, evaporating all 3 mystics. Nori rushes to Sadok's side as the other Harfoots gather around. They sit with the dying Sadok, watching the sunrise together and celebrating his life. Meanwhile, Galadriel and Halbrand arrive in Lindon to have Halbrand's wounds treated. Elrond, having returned from exile in the Dwarven lands, informs Celebrimbor that the dwarves have refused to provide the pure mithril ore needed to forge the elven rings of power. Despite the limited quantity, Celebrimbor suggests they may still be able to create something useful from the small shard of mithril they possess. Galadriel and Elrond reconcile, with Elrond admitting he should have trusted her more and promising not to make the same mistake again. Shortly thereafter, Halbrand, now recovered from his wounds, finds Celebrimbor in his workshop. He praises the elven smith's work and notices the mithril ore on the table. Curious, he asks Celebrimbor about the ore, and Celebrimbor explains that whatever they have, it's not enough. Halbrand then suggests using other ores to amplify the limited mithril they possess. Intrigued by Halbrand's idea, Celebrimbor agrees to work with him to forge the Rings of Power. In the most shocking revelation of the series, Galadriel discovers that Halbrand has lied about his lineage and is, in fact, Sauron. Cornering him, she presses her dagger against his throat, searching his eyes for any sign of deception. Halbrand meets her gaze steadily, unfazed by the sharp blade. Suddenly, Galadriel is plunged into a vision where the world around her shifts, and she finds herself on a raft in the middle of the ocean with Halbrand. In a reflection, she sees him as he truly is, the towering iron-armored figure of Sauron, the Dark Lord. Halbrand, as Sauron, asks Galadriel to stand beside him as his queen, promising that together they will save Middle-earth. The temptation is strong, and Galadriel feels the allure of wielding such great power. However, she remembers her purpose and her vow to protect Middle-earth from evil. With great effort, she tears her gaze away from Sauron's, shattering the vision. Angered by her rejection, Sauron threatens vengeance, vowing that she will watch as Middle-earth burns. Suddenly, Galadriel is plunged into the raging sea. Just in time, Elrond arrives to save her from drowning. Galadriel quickly makes her way to Celebrimbor's workshop and insists that they forge 3 rings of power rather than 1. She says that 1 ring will always corrupt, 2 will divide, but with 3, there will be balance. Galadriel insists that the power that they forge should only be given to the elves for the sake of balance and the preservation of their immortality. Celebrimbor agrees, but tells her that he requires the purest gold and silver from Valinor to alloy with the mithril. Galadriel realizes she must sacrifice her brother Finrod's cherished dagger to obtain these materials, a difficult decision that weighs heavily on her heart. In the Harfoot community, Nori's father and mother encourage her to follow her destiny, acknowledging that she is now part of something greater. They give her their blessing to accompany the stranger, knowing he will need her. Nori gathers with her fellow Harfoots, including her best friend Poppy, to say her goodbyes. The scene is filled with bittersweet moments as Nori expresses her gratitude and affection for her family and friends. Poppy, visibly distressed by Nori's decision, runs to hug her one last time. Nori reassures Poppy that she will be all right and encourages her to continue living life to the fullest. The two friends share a heartfelt embrace, both shedding tears in this poignant scene. Meanwhile, in Celebrimbor's workshop, the 3 rings of power are forged. 1 blue, 1 red, and 1 white, each crafted by the expert smiths of the elves. As the rings are completed, an ominous presence makes itself known. It is Sauron, the Dark Lord, keenly aware of the creation of these powerful artifacts. Galadriel looks on with a foreboding expression, fully aware of the immense responsibility now resting on her shoulders. As this unfolds, Halbrand reaches Mount Doom in the Southlands, which is where the One Ring will one day be forged by Sauron, as explained in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. This concludes the 8th and final episode of The Rings of Power Season 1.